Sarah Mitchell adjusted her veil one final time as she looked at herself in the mirror of the small church's bridal room. The white dress felt strange after years of combat fatigues and tactical gear. Her calloused hands, usually gripping weapons or rappelling ropes, now held a delicate bouquet of white roses and baby's breath. She smiled at the irony. 6 months ago, she had been crawling through the mud in Afghanistan as part of an elite special operations unit. Today, she was about to marry the love of her life in a peaceful mountain town in Colorado. The transition from military service to civilian life had been challenging, but meeting David had made everything worth it. He was a local veterinarian who had never asked her to be anything other than herself. When she told him about her 8 years in Special Forces, including 3 deployments and countless classified missions, he simply nodded and said he was proud of her service. No questions about what she had seen or done, no requests for war stories, just quiet acceptance and love. Her maid of honor, Jessica, poked her head into the room. "Ready, Sarah? Everyone's waiting, and your dad looks like he might cry before he even walks you down the aisle." Sarah laughed. Her father, a retired Marine drill sergeant, had been surprisingly emotional about his daughter's wedding. "Let me just check my makeup one more time." As she turned back to the mirror, Sarah caught sight of a small scar on her collarbone, barely visible above the dress's neckline. A reminder of a mission in Syria where shrapnel from an IED had nearly ended her career. She traced it gently, remembering how different her life had been just a year ago. Back then, her world was measured in tactical objectives, threat assessments, and mission parameters. Now it revolved around wedding preparations, planning their future together, and learning to sleep without keeping one ear open for danger. The church was small but perfect, nestled in a valley surrounded by snow-capped mountains. David had proposed here during a hiking trip, saying he wanted their wedding to be in the same place where he first knew he wanted to spend his life with her. About 60 guests filled the wooden pews, mostly family and David's friends from town. Sarah's guest list was shorter. Many of her military friends were still deployed or stationed far away. Her phone buzzed with a text message. She almost ignored it. But something made her glance at the screen. It was from Marcus, her former team leader, now working private security. "Sarah, we have a problem. Intel suggests your location is compromised. 3 vehicles heading your way. Armed men. Get out now." Sarah's blood turned cold. Her civilian facade dropped instantly, replaced by the sharp focus of a trained operator. She read the message twice, her mind already shifting into tactical mode. Marcus wasn't one for jokes, especially not today. If he was warning her, the threat was real. She quickly typed back, "How many? What's the objective?" The response came immediately. 12 men, possibly more. Unknown objective. Could be revenge related to Damascus operation. Get David and civilians to safety. Local law enforcement already notified, but they're 20 minutes out. The Damascus operation. Sarah's jaw tightened. That mission had taken down a major arms dealer who supplied weapons to terrorist organizations. They had known there might be retaliation, but intelligence had suggested the dealer's network was completely dismantled. Apparently, they had been wrong. Jessica knocked on the door again. "Sarah, the music's about to start." "Give me 2 minutes," Sarah called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She needed to think fast. 12 armed men against a church full of civilians, including her new husband and both their families. The nearest police station was indeed about 20 minutes away, and that was if they drove fast. By then, whatever these men wanted to do would already be finished. Sarah quickly assessed her resources. She was wearing a wedding dress and heels, hardly optimal tactical gear. She had no weapons, no body armor, and no backup except for potentially a few military friends among the guests. But she did have surprise on her side. These men would expect to find a helpless bride, not a Special Forces veteran with expert training in close-quarters combat and hostage rescue operations. She opened the small closet in the bridal room, hoping to find something useful. Behind a stack of church programs and spare decorations, she found what she was looking for, a small toolbox. Inside were a hammer, screwdriver, and some wire cutters. Not exactly military-grade equipment, but she had been trained to make weapons from household items. Moving quickly but quietly, Sarah removed her heels and stockings. The dress would be a problem, but she could work with it. She tore a long strip from the bottom of the dress, creating better mobility for her legs. The wire cutters went into a makeshift pocket she created by tucking them into her bra. The screwdriver went into her bouquet, hidden among the stems. Her phone buzzed again. Marcus. 2 minutes out. 3 black SUVs. Suggest immediate evacuation. Sarah knew there wasn't time for evacuation. Getting 60 people out of a church and to safety in 2 minutes was impossible, especially since most of them didn't even know there was danger. She had to make a choice, run and hope the men weren't interested in the other guests, or stay and fight. It wasn't really a choice at all. These people were under her protection now. David was under her protection. Her military training had taught her never to abandon civilians in danger, and she wasn't about to start on her wedding day. She took a deep breath and walked to the door. In the hallway, she could hear the organist beginning the opening notes of the wedding march. Through the small window, she could see her father waiting at the end of the aisle, his dress uniform immaculate, his proud smile visible even from a distance. "Change of plans," she whispered to herself. Sarah cracked open the door and called softly to Jessica. "I need you to do something very important, and you need to trust me completely." Jessica turned, immediately noticing something different in Sarah's voice. "What's wrong?" "There are some dangerous men heading this way. I need you to quietly tell the guests there's been a gas leak detected, and everyone needs to move to the basement immediately. Don't cause panic, but move fast." "Sarah, what are you talking about? Are you having cold feet?" "Jessica, I'm dead serious. Lives are at stake. Remember what I used to do before I met David? This is real. Go now." Something in Sarah's eyes convinced Jessica this wasn't a prank or wedding nerves. She nodded and hurried toward the main hall. Sarah watched through the small window as Jessica whispered urgently to the pastor, who looked confused but began to quietly address the congregation. She could see David at the altar, his face showing bewilderment, as the pastor directed everyone toward the basement entrance. Her phone vibrated. Another message from Marcus. "1 minute. They're armed with assault rifles." "Sarah, get out of there." Instead of responding, Sarah turned off her phone and slipped it back into her makeshift pocket. She moved toward the front entrance of the church, staying low and keeping to the shadows. Through the glass doors, she could see the mountain road that led to the church. Empty for now, but not for long. The church was a simple wooden structure with large windows and 2 main entrances, front and rear. There was also a side entrance that led to the pastor's office. 3 points of entry to monitor and defend. The basement where the guests were hiding had only 1 entrance through the main church hall, which meant she could bottle up any attackers who tried to reach them. Sarah positioned herself behind the altar, using the raised platform to give her a better view of all 3 entrances. From here, she could see the front doors, the side entrance, and had a clear sight line to the rear door. The basement entrance was directly behind her position. Through the front windows, she saw the first black SUV crest the hill about half a mile away. It was moving fast, followed closely by 2 more vehicles. They would be here in less than a minute. Sarah checked her improvised weapons one more time. The wire cutters were easily accessible. The screwdriver was ready in her bouquet, and she had spotted a heavy brass candlestick on the altar that would serve as a club if needed. Not exactly her preferred loadout, but she had worked with less. Her mind shifted into the calm, analytical state that had kept her alive through dozens of dangerous missions. Threat assessment. 12 heavily armed men against 1 unarmed woman in a wedding dress. Tactical disadvantage? Extreme. Environmental factors, wooden church building, limited cover, multiple access points. Civilian protection, 60 non-combatants in basement, 1 exit point to defend. Objective, neutralize threats, protect civilians, survive until backup arrives. The SUVs pulled into the church parking lot with a screech of tires. Sarah counted 12 men exiting the vehicles, just as Marcus had warned. They were dressed in black tactical gear and carrying assault rifles. Professional setup, not random criminals. These men had training and equipment. She watched them split into 3 groups. 4 men moved toward the front entrance, 4 toward the rear, and 4 toward the side entrance. Classic multi-point entry tactics. They were good, but they were also expecting to surprise a wedding party. Not face resistance from someone who had studied these same tactics for 8 years. The front team reached the doors first. Sarah could hear their low voices as they tested the handles and peered through the glass. One of them gestured to the others, pointing toward the empty sanctuary. "Where is everyone?" one of them muttered, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Check the basement," another voice replied. "The target might have moved the ceremony downstairs." Target. Sarah's blood ran cold. They weren't here for random violence or robbery. They were here for someone specific. Given Marcus's warning about the Damascus operation, that someone was likely her. The question was whether they would be satisfied with just their primary target or whether they planned to eliminate witnesses. The front door handle turned slowly. Sarah gripped the wire cutters in her right hand and positioned herself behind the altar's wooden backdrop. She would have to let them enter and get close before she could act. Surprise was her only significant advantage. The first man stepped into the church, rifle raised and ready. His eyes swept the empty pews and focused on the altar area. Behind him, 3 more men entered in tactical formation, moving with the practiced efficiency of trained soldiers. "Clear front," one of them spoke into a radio. "No visual on targets. Proceeding to basement check." That confirmed what Sarah feared. They knew about the basement. Someone had done reconnaissance on this location, probably days or weeks ago. This wasn't a random attack, it was a carefully planned operation. The rear entry team would be coming through the back door any second. The side team was likely already in the pastor's office. She had to act now while the groups were still separated. Sarah made her decision. She stepped out from behind the altar, still holding her bouquet, and smiled brightly at the 4 men advancing down the aisle. "Hi there. Are you here for the wedding? I'm afraid we had to move downstairs due to a small problem with the heating system." The 4 men stopped, clearly surprised to find a bride standing calmly in the sanctuary. Their leader, a tall man with a scar across his left cheek, lowered his rifle slightly. "You're Sarah Mitchell," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am. And you are?" "Someone who has a debt to settle. You killed our employer in Damascus, cost us a very profitable contract." Sarah kept her smile in place, but her mind was racing. Mercenaries. Not terrorists. That was actually worse in some ways. Mercenaries were often better trained and more disciplined than ideologically motivated fighters. "I'm not sure what you mean. I think you have me confused with someone else. I'm just a veterinarian's wife-to-be from Colorado." The man with the scar smiled coldly. "We know exactly who you are, Sergeant Mitchell. Special Forces, 5th Group, 3 combat deployments. Expert marksman, hand-to-hand combat specialist, demolitions expert. The question is, where are your friends from the wedding party?" "What friends? It's just me here. Everyone else went home when we had to postpone the ceremony." Sarah was buying time, hoping that the longer she kept them talking, the sooner Marcus's backup might arrive. But she could see in their leader's eyes that he wasn't buying her innocent act. "Search the building," he ordered 2 of his men. "Find the others, and be thorough." That was Sarah's cue. As the 2 men moved past her toward the basement stairs, she dropped her bouquet and lunged forward with the screwdriver. Her target was the nearest man's neck, aiming for the carotid artery. But these weren't amateur criminals. The mercenary saw her movement and twisted away, Sarah's improvised weapon grazing his shoulder instead of finding its intended target. His rifle swung toward her, but Sarah was already moving, using her wedding dress's full skirt to obscure her exact position as she rolled behind the front pew. "Contact!" the leader shouted into his radio. "Target is armed and hostile. Converge on Sanctuary now." Gunfire erupted, splintering the wooden pew above Sarah's head. She army-crawled toward the altar, staying low as bullets whined overhead. Her dress was getting shredded, but it was better than getting shredded herself. Behind the altar, she grabbed the brass candlestick and prepared for close-quarters combat. Through the noise of gunfire, she could hear boots running toward the sanctuary from both the rear and side entrances. In seconds, she would be facing 12 armed men with nothing but improvised weapons and 8 years of combat training. Sarah smiled grimly as she heard the basement door slam shut below her. At least the civilians were secure for now. David and her father and all their friends were safe behind a solid door that could be barricaded from the inside. Now she just had to survive long enough for help to arrive. On her wedding day, in a torn wedding dress, against 12 professional killers. "Well," she whispered to herself, checking the wire cutters in her left hand and the candlestick in her right. "This isn't exactly how I planned to start married life." The sound of boots on the church floor was getting closer. Sarah took a deep breath, centered herself in the calm focus that had kept her alive through countless firefights, and prepared to show these mercenaries exactly why Special Forces training never really leaves you, no matter how long you've been a civilian. The first man around the altar was about to get a very unpleasant surprise. The first mercenary who rounded the altar was a stocky man with military-style tattoos covering his arms. He moved with his rifle raised, expecting to find Sarah cowering behind the wooden structure. Instead, he found the brass candlestick connecting with his temple at roughly 40 miles per hour. Sarah had timed her strike perfectly, rising from her crouch, just as the man committed to his turn around the altar. The heavy brass made a sickening thud as it met bone and flesh. The mercenary dropped instantly, his rifle clattering across the floor. But Sarah didn't pause to celebrate. She was already moving, snatching up the fallen rifle and rolling behind the church's piano before the second man appeared. This one was smarter, staying back and firing controlled bursts around the altar's edge rather than exposing himself to close combat. Wood splinters exploded from the piano's surface as bullets tore through the instrument. Sarah counted the shots, 3-round bursts, probably using a standard 30-round magazine. Professional discipline. These men knew their business. "Alpha down," the shooter called into his radio. "Target has acquired weapons. Request immediate backup." Sarah heard the response crackle through the radio. "Bravo and Charlie teams in position, moving to surround. 12 men total, split into 3 teams of 4. Alpha team was in the sanctuary with her, minus the one she had just eliminated. Bravo and Charlie were the rear and side entry teams. In moments, she would be surrounded and outnumbered 11-1. Time to even the odds. The fallen mercenary's gear included smoke grenades and flashbangs on his tactical vest. Sarah grabbed a smoke grenade, pulled the pin, and rolled it across the sanctuary floor toward the front entrance. Gray smoke began billowing immediately, filling the space between the pews and obscuring visibility. She used the cover to move toward the side of the church, where a stained glass window depicted angels watching over a peaceful village scene. Ironic, considering the current situation. Sarah took aim with the assault rifle and put 3 rounds through the window, creating an exit route. Glass rained down as she kicked out the remaining fragments and squeezed through the opening, her torn wedding dress catching on the window frame. She dropped to the ground outside the church and immediately moved toward the rear of the building, where the Bravo team would be entering. The mountain air was cold against her bare arms, and she could feel cuts from the broken glass stinging her skin. But pain was irrelevant right now. She was back in her element, operating with the calm precision that had made her one of the Army's most effective special operations soldiers. Through the church's rear window, she could see 4 men advancing through the back entrance, moving in tactical formation toward the sanctuary where the smoke was now thick enough to reduce visibility to just a few feet. They didn't know she had exited the building. Sarah positioned herself behind their rear vehicle, one of the black SUVs they had arrived in. The license plates were removed, and the windows were tinted dark enough to prevent anyone from seeing inside. Professional operation all the way. She checked the rifle she had taken from the first mercenary. AR-15 variant, 30-round magazine, about 25 rounds remaining. Not her preferred weapon. She had always favored the M4 carbine during her military service, but familiar enough. All assault rifles operated on the same basic principles. The rear door of the church opened slightly as one of the Bravo team members prepared to advance into the sanctuary. Sarah had a clear shot, but she hesitated. These men were trying to kill her and potentially harm innocent civilians, but they were also human beings. Some might be former military themselves, driven to mercenary work by circumstances beyond their control. That moment of hesitation nearly cost her life. The 4th member of Bravo team had circled around the building and spotted her position behind the SUV. His muzzle flash lit up the growing darkness as he fired a burst in her direction. Bullets sparked off the SUV's armored panels. They had come prepared for a firefight. Sarah rolled under the vehicle as more rounds peppered the ground where she had been crouching. The mercenary advanced, keeping his rifle trained on the SUV's position. From underneath the vehicle, Sarah could see his boots approaching cautiously. She waited until he was close enough, then thrust the rifle barrel out from under the SUV and fired 2 quick shots at his ankles. The rounds shattered bone and sent him tumbling to the ground, screaming in pain. Sarah rolled out from under the SUV and secured his weapon, leaving her with 2 assault rifles and significantly better odds. The wounded mercenary was clutching his ruined ankles, no longer a threat, but still alive. She zip-tied his hands with a cable tie from his own gear. These men had come prepared to take prisoners. "Bravo 4 is down," came the radio call from inside the church. "Target is outside the building. Repeat, target is mobile outside the building." Sarah moved quickly away from the SUV, knowing they would converge on that position within seconds. The church sat in a small clearing surrounded by pine trees, with the parking lot on one side and a steep hillside on the other. Limited cover, multiple approaches for the enemy, and nowhere to run without leaving the civilians unprotected. She needed to get back inside and establish a defensive position near the basement entrance. But first, she had an opportunity to reduce the enemy numbers while they were still searching for her outside. The Charlie team was emerging from the side entrance, moving in formation toward the rear of the church where they had heard the gunfire. 4 more men, all armed and dangerous, but focused on finding her rather than protecting themselves from ambush. Sarah climbed onto the roof of the church using a drainage pipe that ran along the side wall. The shingles were slippery from the mountain dew, and her wedding dress made the climb more difficult than it should have been. But she reached the peak and lay flat along the ridge line, giving her an elevated position overlooking the church grounds. From here, she could see the tactical situation clearly. Alpha Team was still inside the church, confused by the smoke and trying to locate her. Bravo Team was advancing through the sanctuary toward the front. Charlie Team was moving around the outside of the building, searching the area where she had disabled their teammate. 10 men still active, plus 1 wounded. She had 2 rifles and whatever equipment she could salvage from the disabled mercenary. The police were still at least 15 minutes away, assuming Marcus had managed to contact them successfully. Sarah's military training had included extensive work on urban warfare and building clearing operations. She knew that the attackers' biggest advantage was their numbers, but that advantage was reduced in the confined spaces inside the church. If she could get them to come to her 1 or 2 at a time, she could even the odds significantly. Time for some psychological warfare. Sarah removed the radio from the wounded mercenaries' gear and switched to their communication frequency. When the next tactical update came through, she was ready. Alpha leader to all teams. Report status. Bravo leader here. Target escaped through side window. One team member down with ankle wounds. Charlie leader. Area sweep in progress. No visual contact with target. Sarah keyed the radio and spoke in her calmest, most professional voice. This is Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, United States Army Special Forces. You gentlemen are trespassing on my wedding day, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The radio went silent for a moment. Then the Alpha leader's voice came back, angry now. You think this is a game, Mitchell? We have enough firepower to level this entire building. Surrender now and we'll make it quick. That's Sergeant Mitchell to you, Sarah replied. And I've got a better offer. You have 9 men left active, and I've only just gotten started. Pack up and drive away now, and I'll let you live to collect payment on some other contract. You're one woman with a rifle against a full tactical team. The math doesn't work in your favor. Sarah smiled as she keyed the radio again. You're absolutely right about the math. But you forgot to carry the one. You see, you're not fighting one woman with a rifle. You're fighting one woman with a rifle who spent 3 years hunting high-value targets in Afghanistan and Syria. One woman who holds expert marksman qualifications on 7 different weapon systems. One woman who has successfully completed 43 combat missions without losing a single team member or civilian under her protection. She paused for effect, watching the Charlie team through the church windows as they regrouped near the front entrance. But most importantly, you're fighting one woman whose wedding day you just ruined. And gentlemen, you have no idea how angry that makes me. The radio crackled with responses from multiple voices, but Sarah had already switched it off. Time for action, not conversation. She slid down the church roof to the edge above the front entrance, where the Charlie team was preparing to breach the doors. They were stacked in entry formation, focused on the doorway and completely unaware of the threat above them. Sarah dropped a smoke grenade into the middle of their formation, then immediately followed it with a flashbang she had taken from the first downed mercenary. The combination of smoke and disorienting light and sound scattered the team, leaving them confused and temporarily blinded. She rappelled down the drainage pipe and moved through the smoke, using the confusion to disarm 2 of the Charlie team members with swift strikes to nerve clusters in their arms. Her hand-to-hand combat training focused on disabling opponents quickly and efficiently, targeting joints and pressure points rather than trying to overpower larger adversaries. The 3rd Charlie team member had recovered enough to swing his rifle toward her, but Sarah was already inside his effective range. She deflected the weapon with one hand, while driving her elbow into his solar plexus with the other. He folded over, gasping for breath, and she followed up with a knee strike that sent him to the ground. The 4th man had backed away from the smoke and was trying to get a clear shot, but Sarah used his teammate as a shield while she closed the distance. A precise strike to his wrist made him drop his rifle, and a follow-up to his temple put him down for the count. 4 more enemies neutralized in under 30 seconds. Charlie team was out of the fight. But Alpha and Bravo teams had heard the commotion and were moving to surround her position. Sarah grabbed 2 more rifles and all the ammunition she could carry, then moved back into the church through the front entrance. The sanctuary was still filled with smoke from the earlier grenade, providing concealment as she made her way toward the basement stairs. She could hear boots moving carefully through the building, searching for her among the pews and behind the altar. All teams, sound off, came the call on the radio she had left switched on. Alpha leader here. Still in the sanctuary, no visual. Bravo 2 here. Bravo leader and Bravo 3 aren't responding. I think they're down. Charlie team is down. Repeat. Entire Charlie team is non-responsive. A long pause on the radio, then, This is Alpha Leader. All remaining personnel, fall back to defensive positions. We're dealing with a professional here. Sarah smiled grimly. It had taken them 8 casualties to figure that out. But now the remaining mercenaries would be more cautious, making them harder to surprise but also less likely to take risks that might harm the civilians in the basement. She reached the basement stairs and took a defensive position behind a concrete pillar that supported the church floor above. From here, she could cover the basement entrance while still having multiple escape routes if the situation deteriorated. Through the basement door, she could hear muffled voices. David was probably trying to keep everyone calm while they waited for the police to arrive. Her father would be wanting to come upstairs and help, but hopefully Jessica or the pastor was keeping him from doing anything heroic and stupid. "Sarah?" David's voice called softly through the door. "Are you okay up there?" "I'm fine," she called back. "Stay put. This will be over soon." "The police are on their way. Maybe you should wait for them." Sarah checked her watch. Still at least 10 minutes before any backup could arrive. The remaining mercenaries weren't going to wait around that long, especially now that they had taken significant casualties. They would either try to finish the job quickly or attempt to escape. "Alpha leader to remaining personnel," the radio crackled. "Target is defending the basement access. We need to flush her out and complete the mission." "What's the play?" came the response. "Incendiary devices. Burn her out." Sarah's blood chilled. If they used incendiary weapons inside the wooden church, the entire building could go up in flames. The basement would become a death trap for everyone hiding down there, including David and her father. That changed everything. No more defensive tactics. No more trying to minimize casualties among the mercenaries. If they were willing to risk killing innocent civilians to get to her, then she needed to end this threat permanently and immediately. Sarah checked her ammunition. Approximately 60 rounds across 2 rifles, plus whatever gear she could salvage from the downed enemies. Against 4 remaining professional killers who were now desperate enough to use fire as a weapon. She thought about David and her father and Jessica and all the people who had come to celebrate what should have been the happiest day of her life. They were counting on her to protect them, just like the civilians she had protected during her military service. Time to remind these mercenaries why Special Forces soldiers were considered among the most dangerous individuals on the planet. Sarah moved away from the basement stairs, drawing the remaining attackers further from the civilians. She could hear them moving through the church above, searching for her new position. Soon they would find her, and when they did, she would be ready to show them exactly what 8 years of military training could accomplish when someone threatened her family. Sarah moved through the smoke-filled sanctuary like a predator stalking prey. 8 years of Special Forces training had taught her that the most dangerous enemy was a desperate one, and the remaining 4 mercenaries had just proven they were willing to burn down a church full of innocent people to complete their mission. That made this personal in a way that transcended professional duty. She positioned herself in the church's bell tower, accessible through a narrow staircase hidden behind the organ. From this elevated position, she had a commanding view of the entire sanctuary and could hear the mercenaries' movements as they searched the building below. The Alpha leader's voice drifted up through the floorboards. "Spread out! Check every corner, every hiding spot. She's got to be somewhere in this building." "What about the incendiary plan?" one of his men asked. "Not yet. We torch this place. We lose any chance of confirming the kill. Command wants proof that Mitchell is dead." Sarah understood now. This wasn't just about revenge for the Damascus operation. Someone was paying these mercenaries specifically to eliminate her, and they needed evidence that the job was done. That meant they couldn't simply burn down the church and walk away. It also meant they would keep fighting until either she was dead or they were all neutralized. Through a gap in the bell tower floorboards, Sarah could see one of the remaining mercenaries moving carefully between the pews, his rifle raised and ready. He was good, keeping to cover, checking corners, moving with the fluid precision of someone with extensive combat experience. But Sarah had advantages beyond just training. She knew this building intimately, having spent weeks here preparing for the wedding. She knew which floorboards creaked, where the shadows fell at different times of day, and exactly how sound carried through the wooden structure. More importantly, she was fighting for something these men could never understand. They were here for money and revenge. She was here for love and protection of innocent lives. Sarah removed her remaining shoe, leaving her completely barefoot for better stealth and balance. The torn remains of her wedding dress were actually helping now, the white fabric broken up by dirt and tears that made her harder to spot in the dim light, filtering through the stained glass windows. She waited until the lone mercenary was directly below her position, then dropped silently through the gap in the floorboards behind him. Her feet hit the floor without a sound, and before he could react to her presence, she had wrapped her arm around his throat in a sleeper hold. He struggled briefly, trying to bring his rifle around to target her, but Sarah had positioned herself perfectly to control both his weapon and his body. Within 15 seconds, he was unconscious. She zip-tied his hands and feet, then appropriated his rifle and ammunition. 3 left. "Bravo 2, report!" came the radio call from across the sanctuary. Sarah picked up the fallen man's radio and responded in a gruff whisper. "Moving to check the vestry. Target might be hiding in the back rooms." "Copy that. Alpha Leader and Alpha 3 are checking the basement perimeter." Perfect. That meant 2 of them were moving away from the civilians while the 3rd was alone in the main sanctuary. Sarah could pick them off one by one if she played this right. She moved toward the church's vestry, a small room where the pastor kept religious supplies and ceremonial items. But instead of entering, she positioned herself in the hallway leading to the room, where she had a clear sight line to the door. When the Alpha Leader arrived to check on his missing teammate, Sarah was ready. The Alpha Leader was the tallest of the remaining mercenaries, and his tactical gear suggested he had significant military experience. Probably former Special Forces himself, given his leadership position and the professional way his team had operated. Under different circumstances, they might have served together in the army, but circumstances weren't different. He was threatening her family. "Bravo 2, the Alpha Leader called into the vestry. When no response came, he signaled to his remaining teammate to cover the entrance while he investigated. Sarah let him enter the vestry fully before making her move. She appeared behind Alpha 3, who was watching the doorway, and struck him in the kidney with the butt of her rifle. As he turned toward her in pain and surprise, she followed up with a knee strike that dropped him to the floor. The Alpha Leader heard the commotion and spun around, his rifle already rising toward Sarah's position, but Sarah had anticipated this and was already moving, using the door frame as cover while she brought her own weapon to bear. They fired simultaneously. The Alpha Leader's shot went wide, splintering wood from the door frame inches from Sarah's head. Sarah's shot was more precise, hitting the man's shoulder and spinning him around. He dropped his rifle but remained on his feet, reaching for a sidearm holstered on his hip. Sarah was already closing the distance. She kicked the sidearm from his hand as he drew it, then followed up with a series of quick strikes that targeted nerve clusters and pressure points. The Alpha Leader was tough and well-trained, but he was also wounded and fighting an opponent who had spent years perfecting hand-to-hand combat techniques. The fight lasted less than a minute. When it was over, the Alpha Leader was unconscious and zip-tied alongside his teammate. 2 left, but Sarah knew the last 2 would be the most dangerous. With most of their team down, they would be desperate and unpredictable. Desperate people made mistakes, but they also took risks that could endanger civilians. Sarah checked her watch. The police should be arriving in about 5 minutes. She could wait them out, maintain a defensive position near the basement, and let law enforcement handle the remaining threats when they arrived. But as she moved back toward the main sanctuary, she heard something that made her blood run cold. The distinctive sound of duct tape being pulled from a roll. Through the basement door, she could hear muffled voices and what sounded like someone trying to speak past a gag. The remaining 2 mercenaries had somehow accessed the basement where the civilians were hiding. All her careful tactical positioning became irrelevant in an instant. The fight was no longer happening on her terms. Sarah raced down the basement stairs, her rifle ready but her mind calculating angles and safe firing zones. The basement held 60 innocent people, including David and her father. She couldn't just spray gunfire and hope for the best. At the bottom of the stairs, she found a scene that made her tactical training take complete control. 2 remaining mercenaries had bound several hostages, including David and her father. Both men had duct tape across their mouths and zip ties around their wrists. The mercenaries had positioned themselves behind the hostages, using them as human shields, while they aimed assault rifles at the rest of the wedding guests, who were huddled together in the far corner of the basement. "There she is," one of the mercenaries called out as Sarah appeared on the stairs. "The bride who's been causing us so much trouble." Sarah immediately assessed the tactical situation. 2 hostels, multiple civilian shields, enclosed space with concrete walls that would cause ricochet problems. This was exactly the kind of scenario her special forces training had prepared her for, but it was also the most dangerous possible situation. "Let them go," Sarah said, keeping her rifle lowered but ready. "Your contract is with me, not them." "That's true," the second mercenary replied, "but they make excellent insurance. Drop your weapon and surrender or we start shooting wedding guests." David was staring at her with wide eyes, but she could see in his expression that he understood the situation. Her father's eyes showed something different. Pride mixed with the tactical awareness of a fellow soldier who knew his daughter was in her element. "You know I can't do that," Sarah said. "Then people die, starting with your husband-to-be." The mercenary pressed his rifle barrel against David's temple. Sarah's military training had included extensive work on hostage rescue operations. She knew the statistics, the success rates, the acceptable loss parameters. But those calculations became meaningless when the hostages included the people you loved most. Time slowed as Sarah's combat experience took over. She noted the positions of both mercenaries, the angles of their weapons, the way they were standing behind their human shields. Both men were focused on her, watching for any sign that she might try to take a shot. They weren't watching the hostages closely enough. Sarah made eye contact with her father and gave him the slightest nod toward his left. As a retired Marine, he understood immediately what she was planning. Her father suddenly lurched sideways, pulling the mercenary holding him off balance just enough to create a clear shooting lane. Sarah's rifle came up in one smooth motion, her scope finding the mercenary's center mass even as he tried to regain his footing. One shot, clean kill. The second mercenary panicked and swung his weapon toward the crowd of civilians. But David had been watching and learning from her father's example. He threw himself backward into his captor, disrupting the man's aim just long enough for Sarah to acquire her second target. 2 shots. Fight over. The basement fell silent except for the sound of people breathing heavily and the distant wail of sirens approaching through the mountain valley. Sarah lowered her rifle and looked around at the wedding guests who had just witnessed their bride eliminate 12 professional killers while wearing a torn and bloodied wedding dress. They stared back at her with expressions ranging from shock to awe to something approaching fear. "Is everyone okay?" she asked, moving to untie David and her father. "I think the question is, are you okay?" David replied as she removed the duct tape from his mouth. "Because that was either the most amazing or most terrifying thing I've ever seen." "Probably both," Sarah admitted, helping him to his feet. "I'm sorry this happened on our wedding day." David pulled her into his arms, apparently unconcerned about the blood and dirt covering her dress. "Are you kidding? I just learned my wife can single-handedly defeat a platoon of mercenaries. I feel like the safest husband in Colorado." Her father had freed himself and was checking on the other hostages. 12 targets neutralized, 0 civilian casualties, and you maintained fire discipline throughout the engagement, he said with obvious pride. "Outstanding work, Sergeant." "Thanks, Dad." though I think my dress is ruined. The police arrived 10 minutes later to find the church looking like a war zone, and Sarah calmly providing first aid to the wounded mercenaries while still wearing the remains of her wedding gown. The lead detective took one look at the scene and radioed for additional backup, a bomb squad, and a federal task force. It took 4 hours to process the scene, interview witnesses, and determine that Sarah had acted completely within her rights to defend herself and the civilians under her protection. The mercenaries were all alive, though several would require extensive medical treatment. During the interviews, Sarah learned that Marcus had been tracking the mercenary team for weeks, following intelligence that suggested a revenge attack was being planned. He had tried to warn her earlier, but hadn't been able to reach her until the last moment. "You should have called me sooner," Sarah told him when he arrived at the scene. "I could have handled this without ruining my wedding dress." "Somehow I doubt that," Marcus replied, looking at the tactical carnage she had created. "Besides, I think you handled it just fine." By the time the authorities finished their work, it was nearly midnight. The church was a crime scene and would remain off-limits for weeks. The wedding cake had been destroyed by gunfire, most of the decorations were ruined, and Sarah's dress looked like it had been through a wood chipper. But when the pastor asked if they wanted to reschedule the ceremony for another day, David and Sarah looked at each other and shook their heads. "We've already been through the worst possible thing that could happen on a wedding day," David said. "Nothing else is going to stop us." They were married at 12:47 a.m. in the church parking lot, surrounded by police cars and emergency vehicles, with Sarah wearing David's jacket over her torn dress and combat boots borrowed from a police officer. Her father walked her down an aisle marked by crime scene tape, and Jessica served as maid of honor while still giving her statement to federal agents. The pastor pronounced them husband and wife as the last of the wounded mercenaries was loaded into an ambulance. "You may kiss the bride," he said with a smile, "though I suspect she can take care of herself." David lifted Sarah's veil, or what remained of it, and kissed her as police radios crackled in the background, and crime scene photographers documented the aftermath of the most unusual wedding reception in Colorado history. "So," Sarah said when they finally broke apart, "how was that for a memorable wedding day?" "Remind me never to get on your bad side," David replied. "But yes, definitely memorable." As they walked hand in hand toward their car, stepping carefully around shell casings and broken glass, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few hours. She had started the day as a former soldier trying to build a normal civilian life. She was ending it as a woman who had just demonstrated that some skills never fade, no matter how much you might want them to. "Any regrets about marrying a Special Forces veteran?" she asked David as they drove away from the crime scene that had been their wedding. "Only one," David said. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What's that?" "I really wish I could have seen the looks on those guys' faces when they realized they had picked a fight with the wrong bride." Sarah laughed and realized that despite everything that had happened, she was exactly where she belonged. Some women had quiet, elegant weddings with flower petals and violin music. She had a wedding marked by gunfire and tactical precision, and somehow that felt absolutely perfect. 3 days later, while they were on their honeymoon in Hawaii, Sarah received a message from Marcus. 12 mercenaries neutralized, terrorist network disrupted, and multiple international warrants executed based on intelligence gathered from your prisoners. Outstanding work. The Army wants to offer you a consulting position. Sarah showed the message to David, who was lying on the beach beside her reading a veterinary journal. "Consulting work?" he asked. "That sounds dangerous?" "Probably," Sarah agreed, "but only part-time, and I promise no more fighting people in a wedding dress." "Deal," David said, "though I have to admit you looked pretty amazing taking down bad guys in white silk." Sarah smiled and deleted the message without responding. Consulting work could wait. Right now, she was exactly where she wanted to be. Married to the man she loved, lying on a peaceful beach where the biggest threat was getting a sunburn. But she kept her rifle skills sharp, just in case.